Hello and welcome to the Sorcerer Corruption Healing Guide. This guide will be a basic principle setup for how the class works overall. This is a spec that I've mained for many years, very much enjoyed my time with it. It is a very powerful, balanced spec to play. So between all the three different types of healers, Sage and Sorc is between the middle. It's a balance between singular crit to group, small amount of hots, not a lot, but it's a good medium between the two, and it's the only class that can offer a means of absorbing damage rather than just straight up healing through it. So this guide is aimed towards anyone that's starting out, anyone that has a question about this, anyone that just wants to maybe see a different outlook through someone else's eyes on their own class, and just a guide in general to go over everything in principle without flooding you with information. There's a lot of information out there. On this channel I try to provide simple, comprehensive advice and guides. It's not about, I'm not trying to throw so much at you that you can't process it and understand it. It's just simply enough so that you can move forward with it and have a good understanding and build for a good solid foundation from there. So, topic number one is we shall go straight away for combat proficiencies. Okay. Now this guide is aimed towards anyone is a level 65 sorcerer. I would not worry too much about anything until you reach endgame to really push your knowledge of your class the most. You'll have a basic grasp of how things work, but this is aimed towards endgame. Okay. So, straight away we're going to move on to your utility points. Now this is for any class, this particular outlook that of looking at your utility points, knowing when and where to use certain points is crucial. It can mean the difference between a win or a lose or a loss. So, straight away, under skillful for corruption, we have the 8 choices of every single one. Skillful, masterful, and heroic, we have the 8 choices. So, going through the ones that speak the most to corruption as a healer. Okay, so empty body, we'll start from the bottom here. Empty body increases all healing received by 10%, does not affect stolen life. Okay, now empty body is good. Obviously it's going to be increasing all healing received, so it works on yourself if the other healer's healing you, or that as you will receive a 10% extra. Now that for me is a must. That is I would consider that a passive utility point spend. That's something that you would just want to have on all the time. Moving on from that, we'll go up one. We're going to go to Force of Fusion. Now, this is not bad, but it's not great at the same time. Overload, which is our knockback as a sorcerer, and assassins have this as well, can heal you and up to 7 affected allies for 1620 to 2170. Now, this is okay. It's another tool to use in your arsenal, okay? But sometimes it's not worth taking depending on the situation. So you can see here I have got this a little bit different. Normally I would take Force of Fusion because it's just simply another heal to have, you know, in your arsenal, like I've just gone over. Now there are a few things here that I wouldn't worry about taking, so I'm just going to go over the ones that you would want to be swapping around. So empty body is a must. Force of Fusion is good. Definitely take that when you don't need what I'm about to talk about now. Sith Defiance. This one have on all the time. Okay, increases damage reduction by 3%. You cannot argue with that. It's good. It may be 3%, may sound small, but it could make all the difference. And that's definitely something that you want. This is the switchable utility. The one that I would suggest is more of a an active, interchangeable utility point. Dark Speed does this. Dark Heal increases the movement speed of the target by 50% for 6 seconds. Cannot occur more than once every 12 seconds. This is very, very useful in certain fights. Now, if you're a newcomer to the game, then fair enough. I completely understand if you don't understand exactly what I'm saying. However, the fights where Dark Speed is incredibly useful is, number one, is Scum and Villainy, when you're doing the Cartel Warlords. For the guy who's kiting around Sunder, granting Dark Speed on him when you've got a Dark Heal proc, for example, it's going to boost his speed up. It means it could make all the difference from him getting stuck and getting rooted into the ground. He'll have a bit more time to actually run away from the boss. So that's something to bear in mind. So remember that's good for that. It's good for Dread Palace as well. Last boss when you're kiting Raptors. Give the guy a bit more speed to get away from him, especially if he's getting caught in the red circle. Dark Speed has saved a few kiters that I've been with in the past who have been a bit slow and not managed to get out the circle, so they're taking damage. So casting Dark Speed helps them get back on track. However, I would say if this is not a viable solution, that there isn't anything to kite, there isn't anything to run away from, all that sort of jazz, I would take Force of Fusion over Dark Speed. I would do that just for that reason, that if it's not necessary, it's good to have an extra heal in your arsenal. A few things that you just wouldn't want to touch. You wouldn't want to touch Chain Shock, because we're not a DPS class, and you wouldn't use Shock anyway as a DPS class for Lightning, so you wouldn't be bothering with that. Sap Strength, Electrocute, Sap Strength, or Electrocute wears off. Not worth it, really. I wouldn't worry about taking that, because it's just these here are worth a lot more with this discipline, with this spec, than any of these. Especially with Force Storm. I mean, our AoE being 25% more powerful on a healer is just not worth it. Okay, so we're going to move down into Masterful now. Now there are a lot in Masterful that are very handy and can be swapped around upon depending on the situation, and we'll go over this now. So I'll start in the same way like we did earlier on. So, electric bindings. Overload binds its targets with electricity, immobilising them for 5 seconds. Direct damage dealt after 2 seconds ends the effect prematurely. Now, this is not used unless in one particular situation. For example, if you are doing Scum and Villainy and you're on Nightmare and you're doing Styrac, when the ads come in for the lightning manifestation, when it goes in the middle, you have to push these, and having electric bindings for that really helps, because it's going to keep them in place for a little bit longer, and that's a good place to take that utility. However, for pretty much everything else that comes to mind, I wouldn't worry about doing it. I wouldn't take it. Moving upwards. Suppression. This is almost a must for me. It doesn't have to be a must, but it is extremely helpful, especially in certain situations, and I've got a few good examples here. Suppression. Activating Cloud Mine grants suppression, which increases damage reduction by 25% for 6 seconds, and that's a decent amount of a reduction. So, the idea with suppression and the reduction is this. It only gives you the buff when you use Cloud Mine. Okay. Now Cloud Mine is our aggro dump, but with this utility we'll also reduce the damage taken by 25%. Now this is extremely handy on certain moments where you know damage is coming. Couple of examples. Terror from the Beyond, hard mode or Nim, when you have Dreadguards. Dreadguards on Hyrad's lightning field. See, I'm normally a solo sorc with a mercenary as a backup healer, as co-healer. We normally have it that he would be healing the tanks, priority 1, group priority 2. I would be priority 1, group priority 2 tanks. And the idea is this. I would bubble all of the DPS and the other healer, but I might not have time to do me before the lightning field comes down. So use suppression, and you've instantly had 25% less damage taken. Even if you bubble yourself, still use it. You will still take less damage, so it means you're not healing yourself, you're healing the group, and that matters a lot. A lot. Whatever you can do to reduce the damage on yourself means that you're not healing yourself, you're healing the other people that need it the most. So, moving on. Going down to Lightning Barrier. Now, this is a must. This is a must, because as a Sorc or a Sage with Static Barrier or Force Armor, this is a must. Increases the amount absorbed by your Static Barrier by 10%. Now, 10% may not sound like a lot, but it really is. It really can make all the difference. Good example of this is, let's say you're on a burn phase and you're about to go down, but you can throw some barriers out just before you go down. Then that's going to last, and the extra 10% may just be able to get you through that burn phase. Okay, so that is a must. Always take Lightning Barrier out of your two choices there. So, moving on from that, Corrupted Flesh reduces damage taken from all periodic effects by 15%. Now this is good, but the thing is, it's periodic damage. And some fights don't have as much periodic damage as some others, so it's debatable on where you would use this. There is one fight that this does come to mind where you could use it, but I would personally prefer suppression over that. Way prefer it over it because of one reason. On TFB HM and NIM, you've got on Dread Guards once again with Kelsara. She puts out 2 periodic damage debuffs, little gold icons. Now this would help you because you're going to take 15% less damage from it. However, 15% versus Cloud Mine's, 25% for 6 seconds. To me, it's worth more having suppression. I wouldn't worry about Corrupted Flesh that much. However, if you see a reason to take it, by all means go for it. But for me personally, it's not as viable as taking suppression. Okay. Moving on to Immersion. Now, Immersion is handy for a few fights specifically. Force Speed grants Immersion, removing all movement impairing effects and granting immunity to them for the duration. Now, this is very, very good for a particular fight that a lot of people hate to death. Is, once again, Skull and Villainy, and it's the Cartel Warlords. With Vilus Gar, he puts a debuff on you called Shiv. Now, you can't break Shiv unless you use, like, CC break. Extrication works when you pull someone as well, but if you have this, you can use Force Speed to break it, so you've got essentially 2 CC breaks. Now, that's very handy. Very, very handy. But you have to make that decision. Is it worth taking this over suppression? Is it worth taking this over whatever else you've decided to use? It's all about weighing up the situation and a little bit of knowledge. If you're new to the game, then you won't know the fights that well, and that's fine, but that comes with time. You just learn and progress with it. Okay, so that's Immersion. Okay. The Conspiring Force is useless for a healer. Targets affected by Reflection slow by 30% for its duration. This is more of a PvP utility, to be honest. This isn't worth talking about, to be honest with you, so we'll leave that one there. Dark Resilience. This can be handy. Reduces the damage taken by the target of your extrication by 25% for 6 seconds when you extricate them. Additionally, increases healing done by Unnatural Preservation by 30%. So now this is good because it offers you 30% more on your own self-heal with Unnatural Preservation, which we'll get to in a while, which is a large self-heal. Now, that's good. It is good, don't get me wrong, it's very good. The extrication part, though, 25% for 6 seconds, that's also decent, and there's one particular situation where that can come in handy. Draxus Nim, right? Now, if you, let's say phase 1 with a Subteros, somebody's got stuck in a big old pile of Subteros and all that jazz, extricating them with that utility on will get them out and provide them with at least a buff from the damage that they're about to receive if one of them's still following it. Now, it helps, but to be honest with you, this is seldom used. It's not really worth it unless a fight directly that you believe could benefit from it. I wouldn't worry. My main choices here is between suppression and lightning barrier. That's pretty much what I'll always take, unless I specifically know where Corrupted Flesh might come in handy, but it will most likely be these two under Masterful for me. Lastly though, we've got Dizzying Force, so reduces target's accuracy by 20% for 8 seconds after Whirlwind End. This is PvP yet again. This is not something you want to be worried about. Okay, moving on. Heroic. So under here, there's a few useful utilities here, but number one is an absolute must, is Force Mobility. This is simple enough. Thundering Blast, Innovate, and Force Leech may be activated while moving. This is a must. This is a must. You must remain mobile. This is something that will remain a passive that you would always have on and never take off. This is extremely helpful to have. Moving on from that one, we have got Backlash. Static barriers you place on yourself erupt in a flash of light when they end, binding up to 8 nearby enemies for 3 seconds. Now, this is irrelevant because it's not helping us heal people. You see, it's not helping us. And considering the main time you'll be using your barriers is in a boss fight, not with ads, so it's relatively useless. Okay, Surging Speed. Polarity Shift increases your movement speed by 50% while active. In addition, Force Speed lasts 0.5 seconds longer and when Force Barrier ends, the active cooldown of Force Speed is finished. Not usable, not useful for us. Not at all. We don't need the speed boost. We already have Force Speed. That's more than enough. We don't need anything else to boost anything there. Corrupted Barrier. Your Static Barrier, Force Barrier and Enduring Bastion heal you for 2% of your total health every second for as long as they last. The healing scales up to 8 times with the charges for Enduring Bastion. Now, this isn't bad at all, but it's outweighed a lot. Okay? But it's not bad. It's a means of looking after yourself longer, being a bit more survivable. Okay. Moving on, Haunted Dreams. If your Whirlwind breaks early from damage, the target is stunned for 2 seconds. In addition, Whirlwind activates instantly. Not worth taking. Not worth taking. It's seldom we're going to use our Whirlwind. We're only going to use it on adds on trash. Nothing that's worth worrying about. Reduces all damage taken while stunned by 30%. Shapeless Spirit. It's not bad, but the idea is that you shouldn't be stunned. You know, there are a few things that will stun you. It's unavoidable, but it's not really worth taking. Okay. Force Haste reduces the cooldown of Force Speed by 5 seconds and Force Slow by 3 seconds and Force Barrier by 30 seconds. Now, for Force Barrier being reduced by 30 seconds on the cooldown, sounds extremely useful. However, Force Barrier, it's a very good tool to use. It's your panic button. You click that, nothing will happen to you. However, this isn't bad to have as a utility, but you're not going to be using Force Barrier that much anyway, especially if things are being done properly. So moving on, this is almost a must, to be fair. Shifting Silhouette reduces all area of effect damage taken by 30%. In addition, using Phase Walk to return to its marked location grants Shifting Silhouette, keeping you from being leapt or pulled and making you immune to interrupts ability activation pushback for the next 6 seconds. Very strong utility. It's your AoE reductions, box standard reduction. This is extremely good, must be taken in certain fights. One is Titan 6 of S&V, Terror from the Beyond, Dread Palace, all that sort of... the last boss and all that sort of jazz. Anything that's got AoE damage, use Shifting Silhouette. The Phase Walk being a plus part is quite good, especially say like S&V, like when you can just move away, like especially if Shiv's on you, like if you got Violus who just popped up next to you, you could pop Phase Walk, try and get a little bit from that. I personally leave these two the way they are. However, if I was to choose something else here, I possibly would either go between Force Haste or Corrupted Barrier. But for the most part, I would just leave this the way it is. I wouldn't change this that often. But between those two, maybe I would replace this with one of those, depending on the situation. But most of the time, I will just leave them like this. So, without going on for too long, this is the utilities that I have on at the moment. But I would indeed swap Dark Speed to go and do Force of Fusion if absolutely necessary, all that jazz. Normally it would be bump, bump, bump like that for me, and then the rest of the way that is. But with what we're doing recently, I've still got Dark Speed on. So I'm going to reset this so I practice what I preach. Okay, and that's that. So, moving on from this, we are going to go and look now towards the gearing side of things. Now, this is indeed 4.0. 5.0 is not far away. So what I will do is I shall do an amended video to this that will cover 5.0 and anything new in it. So it would be watch this video first, then watch the 5.0 afterwards. I'll try and put a link in this video that leads to that video. So, as of 4.0, our top tier gear set is 224. And this sorcery is all 224, so it's all the top rated gear, all augmented, all that jazz. But it doesn't matter too much. It's the same principle applies for every gear set that you're in. So, when we look at the build that we have got Mastery at 53.93, Endurance 63.75, 29.40 on the power, Crit is 15.43, and Alacrity is 13.29. I would suggest to actually run this with about 1600 Crit and around the sort of 1270, 1250, 1270 Alacrity. The reason why I've swapped one augment for Alacrity is because I've been doing a lot of like TFB, Dread Guard and stuff where having more Alacrity is useful. so I can actually build up my force quicker. So that's an idea. Like, you can swap this around a little bit if needs be. Swap some augments around depending on where you know you can maybe like cheese it a little bit. So yeah, the set bonus gear. So for everybody that's maybe newer to the game, set bonuses are extremely important. So for the sorcerer on the healing, your 2p set bonus is activating a healing ability has a 15% chance to grant Force Mystic's critical bonus, which causes your next Dark Infusion or Deliverance to be critical. This effect can only occur once every 30 seconds. Very useful, very useful. 4. This is your 4 set bonus. Consuming Darkness or Vindicate restores an additional 5 force. This is a must. That is, you rely on regenerating your force, building it and spending it. 6. 6 set bonus. So this is 6 out of 7 pieces of set gear. A set gear is from, at this point in time, story mode HM and NIM gear, NIM operations. However, 5.0 is going to be dropped from the command crates, but we'll get to that another time. Reduces the cooldown of Innovate and Healing Trance by 1.5 seconds. Now, this is crucially important, and I will get to why when I go through the abilities and when and where and what they are. Innovate is your ability that's a long cast, but it adds, it ends up building Force Surge when it crits, but we'll get to that in a moment. So having that reduced down by 1.5 seconds is extremely handy, because you need this to build your resources. Okay, so moving on from that, this is what we've got. This character is also with all of the Datacrons, all of that jazz, all the old companion, +1 to this, +1 to the crit and all that jazz. Right, so moving on from that, let's move on now to, we're going to start getting into some of the abilities. So, with the abilities that a sorcerer has, we have a lot of single target focus healing, but we also have a lot of group healing. We're one of the top bursty healers, but we're also one of the top group healers as well. Not so much with the overtime, but there is still a little bit to it. So we're going to run through the basics now. We're going to go through just the main bread and butter, and then we're going to talk about what can buff this, how this works here, what procs what, when and where to use this. One thing that I want you to understand now, for anyone that's new watching this, is healing wise, it's not like DPS. If you've been a DPS player and you're looking into healing, it's all a matter of triage. Okay, so what it is, it's knowing where to use what and to be effective in doing it. What I mean by effective matters. What it is let's say Baldar here was let's say he's got 80k HP, right? Let's say he's lost 10k, so he's down to like 70k. Now let's say you've got a Dark Infusion. Okay, Dark Infusion is your larger heal. I'll just hover over it quickly. So it's one of your larger heals, especially when it's buffed with Resurgence. Now, that can instantly restore all of that HP. But let's say this. Let's just say, in a theoretical term, right, Resurgence has gone on, Dark Infusion's gone in, and it's gone, boom, it's done 15k. Right, 15k. Simple as that. But he only needed 10k. 5k is now lost. It's 5k that has not gone into the target. So this is where, if you had Star Pass open, which is a combat logging add-on, you would see that the effectiveness of that heal was reduced by a certain margin. You'd have like a certain percentage. Now, this it's a little bit advanced, but the idea is to try and learn what your abilities can do to try and stay as effective as possible. Because the thing is, you're spending a resource, and when you spend it, you want to try and be as efficient as you possibly can be with that ability, especially with what it costs you in force. So we'll go over a couple of things now. So Dark Infusion, this is completely unbuffed. Okay, so standard cast time 1.8 with the alacrity that I've got, 14.5. Not bad. Okay, not bad. It's about the standard. We'll do one more, and boom, 16k, right there. Now it's unbuffed. Okay, it's still a decent amount. The crit's still high, still decent. But what happens is, with Dark Infusion, is if you look at the force here, when Dark Infusion is used, it consumes 7 force. Okay, 7 force. That's good. That's a good low amount. Now, watch what happens when I show you the difference between Dark Infusion and Dark Heal. I'm just going to let the proc wear off on Dark Heal quick. Okay. So, Dark Heal. Now this is a quicker heal. It heals for less, but consumes more force. So here we go, 1.3, boom. But it consumed 10 force. So we'll do it one more time. So watch the bar just there. Boom, 90, not 93. So 10%. Now here's the thing about Dark Heal. Dark Heal is good because it's fast, but it can ruin your resource management. It is not something to be spammed. I'll show you what I mean. See, if I spam a few of these now, see how much. See, it's a large chunk it's taking, large chunk, and we've only just started doing them. It's a large chunk taken away, so it's not good. You want to be using Dark Heal on a proc, and when I say proc means procedure. So, for example, let me just build the force back up. So here's what happens. So Dark Infusion. When you use Dark Infusion, boom, it will proc up Dark Heal, and that won't cost you anything. But that's the only time you really want to use it. Don't get me wrong, you can use it in a pinch moment, but remember, it's like this. It's the balance between cost of action to the effect. So the cost of the action, you know, is 10 force. So if you're already low, and say a tank or something is running low on health, if you spam this, you are going to be depleted, and you'll have a very hard time coming back up again. So you need to triage the situation. What should I use in the right situation? And we're going to come to that once I go through the abilities. So we've gone through those two. These are kind of like your bread and butter. Okay, Resurgence. Now Resurgence is a heal over time, and I'll show you what I mean by this. So we put it on Baldur, boom, it's instant. It's a small amount. If you watch him, it will tick over time. Okay, so it's going to do a small amount of healing over time. It's not a lot, but it's what it needs. Sometimes this can just tick somebody over enough, especially if they're sitting in a barrier whilst you're dealing with somebody else. Okay, but the one thing that Resurgence does, and it will do this every single time it's cast, watch the buffs tray here. So Resurgence, boom, force bending, effectiveness of next healing ability increased. So this applies to all of your abilities. Okay, basically what Resurgence does is it's a self buff when it gives you force bending. Okay, so I'm going to show you this now. So Dark Infusion, on its own it's 1.8 seconds on the cast time. Okay, but if you use Resurgence to get force bending and then use it, it's 1.3 and 18k. So it's best of both worlds on that one. So once again, Resurgence, get force bending, Dark Infusion, boom. So that was a small one there. The crit wasn't with it, but it was fast. This is the difference. Is whenever you can and you need to give someone a large heal, give the Resurgence, then the Dark Infusion, and it will heal a lot more. Okay, it will go quicker and it will be a large amount. Okay, especially when the crit's with it. Obviously, it's exactly that crit chance. It doesn't always crit high, but when it does, you've got the most amount of chance with Resurgence. Okay, now moving on from that, from Resurgence, we've got Innovate. Innovate here is a cast, so it's 2.1 second on the cast time for me. Now this does two things. So this is very, very important to use Innovate, very important. Now, something to understand about this is, the reason why it's important is because this is the way you build your resources. So, once more, I'm just going to build up this. You'll know when you've got the buff from this, because you start glowing purple, is you have here Force Surge, and you'll see that it's got 3 stacks. So, effectiveness of next consuming darkness or verification is increased. Now, what this means is you have a few choices. When you're going 1, 2, 3 stacks, so anything between 1 and 2, you will have Consuming Darkness procced, so it glows gold, you can see the border. Now what happens is you have a choice when you reach 3 stacks, however. At 3 stacks, you can cast Verification on the move, so you can move whilst it's like this, and it will be an instant cast, okay? And it's a bit more powerful, alright? Now, however, you've used all 3 stacks. It's not 1 stack, it's all 3 stacks for this. And this is where some people get a little bit misled by this. They want to throw it out immediately. You need to think. So let me just build up Innovate again. I'm using Resurgence to buff Innovate, so I know I'm going to get 3 stacks because it's crit. When it buffs Innovate, it's going to have a higher crit chance, and you only get full Surge when it crits. Okay, so here we have the 3 stacks, and we've got Consuming Darkness. So I'm going to consume 1 Darkness. Boom. So what I've got now is I have got Reverse Corruptions. Force Regeneration Rate increased. It does exactly the opposite of what Force Surge does with Consuming Darkness without Surge. So if I get rid of my Surge, I'll show you what happens if you use Consuming Darkness without it procced with 4 Surge stacks. Here we go. Weary. You will see this a lot in new players. Force Regeneration Rate decreased. It's exactly the opposite of what Reverse Corruptions is. This is doing a world of hurt. And see there, 4. This is the worst possible thing you can do as a sorcerer, is have 4 stacks of Weary. You have almost 0 force regen when you've done that. You are just you're literally putting a stop sign in front of yourself, and you're not going to be able to do anything. So remember this: when you're doing your healing and you're going through the triage of the situations, throw out Innovate for the cast so that you can always have Consuming Darkness. And the idea is this: I'm just going to show you quickly a rough way of how this works. So you'd be like Resurgence, Innovate to make sure you're getting your stacks. You would consume 2, sit on 1 for Reverse Corruptions, continue doing your healing, all that jazz. So you got your proc there, all that stuff there, and then you consume the last one, all that stuff. Build up Innovate, get more stacks, consume 1, consume 2 if needed. That's what it's like. Whenever you're doing your healing and Innovate's on cooldown, when it comes back and somebody's got an effective amount of healing to be done on them, then use it, and always keep replenishing your Force Surge stacks. That way you will always have Consuming Darkness procced with Force Surge. That's the one staple of this, that you will live and die on this principle. Okay, moving on from that, we're going to move on to Revivification now. Now, Revivification is a lovely word that my tongue struggles to say. Now, this is your AoE healing. Now, there's a misconception with this. Now, I'm just going to throw it out, and I want to show you how this works, right? So, I am already a bit close to it, but what I'll do is I'll get rid of it, okay? And I'm going to chuck another one out in a second, just so you can see how this works. So, you can see it's a big purple ring on the floor, okay? So, what this does is anybody that enters it picks up Revivification buff. Now, the thing that's misconcepted about it, I'm just going to throw it over there quick, is you see it's over there, right? Now, people think that you have to stand in it. Watch the buffs bar. Boom, I've got it. See? Revivification, periodic healing. But if I leave it, I've still got it. All you need to do is simply touch it. That's all a group needs to do. One thing I like to do with this, especially if there's a lot of movement going on, if I've got one procced, I will throw one in the direction where the entire group is moving. A good example is Dread Palace with Raptus. When the DPS go and get their curse, is I will chuck one on their curse, so that when they're picking up their curse, they're actually sitting in my healing. So I haven't got to do as much healing when I've got my curse. All that jazz. To new players, don't worry, that was something that you'll understand in time. So once again, it goes on the floor. Anybody that's near it or touches it gets the Revivification buff for AoE healing. This is extremely important on certain occasions where the whole group's up and you need them clumped together for AoE healing, because this just helps the whole group. Okay, moving on from that. So what we have next is we're going to move on to a very, very good ability that was a recent addition, Roaming Mend. Roaming Mend can heal 4 people when it's buffed, but we'll get to that in a second. When you place Roaming Mend on a single character that is unbuffed, when it's unbuffed from Resurgence, you see here, there are Roaming Mend charges 4 heals, number of heals remaining. So the idea is this: when it receives healing, when it receives damage, it will consume a charge. It will heal that target that it is on 4 times. Okay. Now that's how that works for that. But when it is buffed with Resurgence, it will bounce around up to 4 people. It might even hit just 2 people, but it will bounce around, and that is incredibly useful. It is incredibly useful. It's one of the best abilities that we've got in recent times for a sorc. So Resurgence, boom, and it'll bounce. This is what you want to use. However, there are some situations where you can't use this. I'm not saying you can't use it at all, but a good example here is TFB-HN and TFB-NIM, right? When the tank has got forced leech going on. Now, you don't want to be bouncing around a roaming men, but you can put it on a singular target. So you can put it on the tank that doesn't have leech. So you're not excluding the tool, you just need to understand that the principle has changed in the way you want to use it. Okay, so moving on from that. Now we have static barrier. This static barrier, now what this does is you will see that it says here deionized. Don't worry about the debuff, it's just simply saying that it cannot be targeted by another static barrier. Now, what these do is it absorbs a certain amount of damage. Okay? So, as you can see here, lightning shield lasts 30 seconds, absorbs a moderate amount of damage. The target deionized cannot benefit for another one 15 seconds. This is your bubble. It will be commonly referred to as a bubble. This will absorb some of the damage, and as we said earlier on, you have the utility as well that will increase the amount absorbed by it by 10%. So that's very, very handy to have. So remember that this is something that you would apply pre-raid, tanks first, melee DPS the next, all that sort of stuff. And just give everybody that before you go into the raid, and then as you go through the raid, try and maintain it on the tanks, and then apply it appropriately to other people, but we'll get to that in a moment. Moving on from that, force barrier. This is your panic button. This here will literally make you Jesus Christ himself. Alright? This will simply make you invincible. It will purge any effects that are on you, anything that can be cleansed, even things that can't be cleansed, it will still cleanse them. So, boom, you use that, you won't take damage, you won't get pulled, you won't do nothing will happen to you when you're in your safe place, when you're in your force barrier. Okay, so remember that's your panic button. You can use this on certain boss mechanics as well. In Terror from the Beyond, Dreadguards, when Cypher throws out his Doom debuff, if you use Force Barrier on the last couple of seconds before Doom would go off, any number of stacks, it will absorb all of them. It's a very powerful ability. And then moving on, we have Consuming Darkness. Now, as we just said a minute ago, it will restore Force, okay? But remember only to use this with Force Surge stacks, otherwise you will make things a lot harder for yourself. Moving on from that, Unnatural Preservation. This is a very large self-heal, so boom. 11k, can be more. Can be a lot more, actually. This is very good. This is the means of looking after yourself. We're probably one of the only classes that has a button that simply means, boom, I'm going to heal myself for a large amount. Everyone else has to target and heal themselves. So, moving on from that one, Overload. Overload, simple as this, is the pushback. But, as you can see there, it did a little bit of healing because I've got the utility for it. If I didn't have the utility, it wouldn't do anything. Moving on from that, we have Expunge. This is the cleanse. Cleanse also does a tiny amount of healing as well, but this is to cleanse any cleansable effects, debuffs from whoever you've targeted. Okay, now going to go through a couple extra things as well. This is primarily focused towards the healing side of things, as I'm not going to talk about Force Lightning and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so moving down to the second quick bar here, Recklessness. Recklessness will grant you 2 charges and will increase 2 of your abilities, whichever ones you decide to use 2 charges on, will increase their crit chance by 60%. So the idea here is if I click it, it will come here. So you've got 2 charges and it lasts 18 seconds. So we're going to do a Dark Infusion, and then we've got a Dark Heal, so boom, 2 large amounts of healing, okay, but it's 2 charges. So remember, it's a long cooldown, but for 2 charges. Alright? So remember that with Recklessness, Dark Infusion will do a lot. It will do a large solo crit heal on whatever you're looking at. But remember, it's just 2 charges, so use them wisely. Polarity Shift. This is a huge alacrity boost, 20% to alacrity and immunity to pushback and interrupts. Very, very handy. Very, very handy. I normally use these 2 in conjunction with each other to knock them out faster. Normally Recklessness and Polarity Shift, I use them at the same time so that I know I've got the means of, when things get really rough, that I know I can just knock out things as quickly as possible and get them as buffed as possible. One other thing to make a note of also is, you may see I've got a couple of Medpack and Adrenals here. For anyone that's new to the game, Triage Adrenals is what you want to use for healing. It'll increase force power and tech power. So use these, have a nice stockpile of them when they're needed. Don't try and spam them all the time because you need them when things get rough. Couple of things to note, your dots. Crushing Darkness Does what it says on the tin. You can do this pre-raid, like just as you start, you can do some DPS with these, and you can also help when you're not healing, do off DPS, so do damage. Put dots on the boss whenever you can, especially Affliction. Affliction is instant, and it does, you know, tiny amount of damage, but it can make all the difference. Extrication. Extrication, very simple. It's the one that pulls. Okay, now pulling something actually reduces the threat. So let's say somebody's done something they shouldn't have, they've pulled the boss, they're about to die, extricate them. It will help reduce their threat. If they aggro dump at the same time and you do it, you may be able to save them. You can also use this to pull people out of stuff if they haven't realised. The amount of times I've saved people from the Mind Droid on Grubfuck on Dread Fortress and stuff like that is beyond count. Okay, so moving on from that, Phase Walk. Phase Walk is an extremely useful ability. So right there, this here will allow me to, within a certain range, instantly teleport back to wherever I put the Phase Walk down. It's very, very good, very, very handy in certain fights, especially when you know when you've got to run away to a certain point. So, good example is Titan 6 for the defense sequence 2, not 2, sorry, defense sequence 3. When you need to get behind the rocks, you can have this pre-engagement behind the rock, ready and waiting. Moving on, we have Jolt. This is the interrupt. This is important because as a healer, our job is also to interrupt certain things at certain times depending on what your raid leader wants you to do. Right, Cloud Mind. Because I have the utility, when I use Cloud Mind, you will see there suppression, 5 seconds, damage reduction increased. Doesn't last very long, but it can save your life. Okay, and it's also your aggro dump. Right, Affliction, basic dot. Doesn't do, it's damage over time, very basic, very small. Force Lightning does what it says on the tin. Reanimation is your combat revive. Now remember, for any new players, that you can only revive somebody in combat once with this. Then you've got a long 5-minute cooldown. Alright, so please bear in mind of that one. Okay, so now we're just going to give you a quick overview of what to do in certain situations. So remember this is in basic principles. Resurgence buffs everything. Whatever you do with Resurgence, it will do more. Okay, so remember that. Dark Infusion is your largest heal and it consumes the least amount of force. Dark Heal is your quickest heal but consumes the most amount of force. Resurgence is the buff and the heal over time. Buffs everything else that you do that we just said. Innovate. Innovate is a channeled ability, does a decent amount of healing but will also build Force Surge. This is something that you must be doing constantly to remain Force Surge. Verification is AoE healing that does not need to be stood in, merely picked up. So it's a good idea to just simply have people walk through it. Roaming Mend is a single target, unbuffed with 4 charges. It will heal a single target. When it's buffed with Resurgence, it will bounce around. Once it comes with cooldown, I'll just do that quickly to just show you again. Okay, so Resurgence, Roaming Mend, bounces around up to 4 players. Moving on from that one there, Static Barrier absorbs the damage, so you can do this onto people. When the debuff wears off, you can reapply it again. Remember, this belongs to the tanks the most. Force Barrier is your panic button. Consuming Darkness only when it's procced, when it's golden, from using with Force Surge stacks from Innovate. Unnatural Preservation to heal yourself. Overload if you have the utility to heal somebody up. If not, it's good for pushing ads at least. Expunge to cleanse any debuffs that are on guys. Recklessness, you would use this for your 2 charges, so you can get through a Dark Infusion and instant Dark Heal. Large amount of healing right there on the proc. Polarity Shift for your... I'll show you how this works. This is for the Alacrity. As you can see, it's down to 1.5. Very, very fast cast from that now. All that jazz. You can also use Resurgence with it to make it 1.1, but it's a little bit quick, a little bit slow. So a lot of healing can be done during these 2 together. A lot of them. Triage Adrenal for exactly the reason when you need to use them. Boost up your force power. Crashing Darkness, do some damage. Extrication to pull something when it's in a bad spot and to reduce threat. Phase Walk to jump away, before raid, or you want to put it down just to jump away. Jolt to interrupt, Cloud Mind to aggro dump, and also with the utility to reduce the damage taken. Basic Affliction for basic damage. Force Lightning, channeled ability, does a little bit of damage, not too bad. And Reanimation is your revive. So, in recap and overall, it's a matter of this. Innovate to keep Force Surge. That's #1 priority. Okay? Dark Infusion for the larger heals, buffing everything else, buffing Innovate, getting more stacks, all that stuff. When you got 3 stacks, you can make that decision of whether to chuck out an instant cast of verification or not. But this is what you'd be doing. You would just simply be using Resurgence to buff up, getting the Surge, putting more healing down, buffing things again, getting the Mend off, going back through Innovate, getting the stacks, consuming 2 of them if needed. Literally just like you see what I'm doing now. And there you go. And that's it. Once you get that principle down, it's a matter of you now learning the triage process. And like I said earlier on, it's a matter of knowing your class, knowing what heal does what, and being as effective as you possibly can with said abilities and class. Okay, so this is Sorcerer. So thank you very much for watching. Sorry I know it's gone on a bit of a long time. I will try and do a text description below as well to go with this, so please bear with me on that one. There will be 2 more guides for Operative and Merc as well. I will also do a Republic side version as well, possibly. So thank you very much for viewing, and take care, have fun, and see you in 5.0.